Well, hey, all. Welcome to yet another episode of the Higher Line podcast. Hey, have you ever heard that salt is bad for you? If you eat too much sodium, you'll get high blood pressure and die. I think that's something that we've all heard, especially in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We've got a guest today, Mr. Rob Wolf. Rob is one of the founders behind the product Element. It is an electrolyte product that he brought to market to help people like you and me keep our body's electrical system working as it's supposed to. He's got a lot of great ideas and research on this topic and a whole lot more. Best-selling author, jiu-jitsu black belt, and a bunch of other cool stuff. Let's dig right in with Mr. Rob Wolf. Welcome to another episode of the CarryTrainer Higher Line podcast. Well, all right, everybody. As I told you, Mr. Rob Wolf of Element. Does it irritate you when people say LMNT?
No,
like, hey,
then you just know who's on the inside and who's kind of a newbie, you know? So it's actually great. Yeah.
It's an immediate delineation of who's who.
Who's on the inside and who's new to the party. Yeah.
All right. Well, that means everybody listening now has the inside scoop. It's Element.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you've done tons of interviews. Who are you? Start with that.
Gosh. I mean, going back, I was a research biochemist way back in the day.
Like the 1930s, or when are we talking?
About the 1930s. I graduated in 98 and was looking at medical school. After that, moved up to Seattle. And it's kind of funny. I was looking at both naturopathy program and the UW. And right around that time, I became really sick. I developed ulcerative colitis so bad that I nearly died from it. And I mean, that's a long, convoluted story, but I knew enough about medicine at that time that the treatment options for ulcerative colitis really sucked. It was like immunosuppressant drugs or get in and cut a couple of feet of real estate out of my digestive tract. And neither of those end well. And I was just kind of casting around trying to find anything that would help me. And I just picked up an Atkins book of all things and was kind of leafing through it. And I was not having weight problems at the time. At one point, I was a California state powerlifting champion, weighed 185 pounds, 345 bench, 565 squat and deadlift, like pretty strong for a young kid. And I was down to like 125, 130 pounds from malabsorption issues. I'm
Body
about
just wasn't
160
absorbing
pounds.
any of that
Yeah,
nutrients.
it was just blasting through me. And so I was just desperate. And so I'm not even sure why I picked up an Atkins book, but in the book, it mentioned all these improvements that he had seen with like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis and all this type of stuff. And I was like, well, I'm dying. Like I'm literally dying. So I have nothing to lose here. And this is where I started tinkering with what would, you would eventually call like a low carb keto or paleo type diet. And for me, it absolutely saved my life. And at that time I was eating a vegan diet and I don't want to, that was not a good fit for me, but I was also in a grad program living like a complete asshole. Like I was sleeping like 3 or 4 hours a night. I lived in a basement apartment and in Seattle. When I eventually, a couple of years later, got my vitamin D levels checked, they were like 12 and they should be around
I was
65 to
gonna say
80.
8.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so I don't think a vegan diet works for very many people very often, but I don't also want to just like totally throw it under the bus. If I had written a prescription for how to give somebody an autoimmune disease, I couldn't have done it better than what I did.
You
It
were
was like,
living it, huh?
yeah, high stress, poor sleep, totally fucked up circadian biology, and I was eating a diet that just at brass tacks was not good for my physiology. I have celiac disease, so I have this autoimmune gluten intolerance on top of everything. But it was all of that stuff when that got on my radar. What was interesting is the transformation in my health was so profound, and this orientation around like ancestral health, evolutionary biology, it really spoke to me, and it was so powerful that it's kind of like I can't do regular medical school now. Like I can't go through 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency, to just get out the back end and really not be in an effective place to administer this type of stuff. And I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do at that time, but this was right around 2000, 2001, and I was casting around the interwebs on the Fred Hutch cancer researchers, dime. I would an assay, poke around on the web, and I found this weird workout called CrossFit. And I started fiddling with that, and I found a guy there in the Seattle area who was also fiddling with it. His name's Dave Warner. He's a retired SEAL, and he and I started working out together. We converted his garage into a gym, and before we knew it, maybe 3, 4 months of working out, we started, just as CrossFitters have tendency to do, started recruiting people to the garage. And I reached out to the Glassmans, and I still have this original email. I wrote the first affiliate inquiry email that they had ever received. And it's basically, hey, my name's Rob Wolf. My friends Dave Warner and Nick Nibbler. We are training people in a gym, his garage. We want to open a more formal facility. Do we have your blessing to do that? And they were basically like, yes, go be achieve. And that was the first CrossFit affiliate gym in the world. And
I think I read you were part of the first and the fourth.
And the fourth, yeah, yeah. And so not long after that, I had a chance to go down to Chico, California, where I did my undergrad. And Greg Glassman, the founder of CrossFit, introduced me to this guy, John Frankel, who was a newly minted BJJ black belt, Harvard PhD in Korean language and Asian languages. But John was interested
His
in.
signature's up on the wall there
Oh,
somewhere.
nice,
He's
nice.
been in this room, yeah.
That's awesome. And so John wanted to run like a jujitsu MMA gym. He wanted CrossFit strength and conditioning with it. Nobody has the bandwidth to do all that. And so we got together and we opened what was then NorCal Strength and Conditioning, NorCal Martial Arts, and that was the fourth CrossFit affiliate gym. And so, man, there's all kinds of other stuff. I've written a couple of New York Times best-selling books and have just been in and around this health space for like 25 years. But I guess those are some of the big hallmarks, kind of why I got into this and my own health crisis, providing this really powerful orientation about I guess the way that I look at the world, and then being very early in the CrossFit, paleo, ketogenic diet space, and projecting forward to now, where I'm still like, it's funny when I look back, my message really hasn't changed that much, other than I'm not quite as much of a zealot about things. I'm a little softer touch, but I still think that something that looks like a paleo ancestral type diet is phenomenal for the vast majority of people, particularly if they had some health issues. Like it's really hard to find a better like place to start. Maybe that's not where you finish, but like as a place of like, let's just get a new baseline and start from there. I'm really hard pressed to find something better. We try to get people sleeping better and more in tune with their circadian biology, have a little bit of an eye towards their gut health and community and all that type of stuff. And really that hasn't changed much over the last 25 years. I'm just a little bit less of a zealot about it and a little softer sell.
It's interesting. My dad was deep into this stuff 30, 40 years ago, doing Atkins style diet, and was a big proponent of it. It's like this stuff like comes in vogue, and then people
Yep.
change the name a little bit, and the name catches on. And like CrossFit, for example, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, like his book Pumping Iron. You remember, as a kid, he'd go to the park, and these guys were tossing sandbags around and doing pull-ups on tree branches and shit. And then like you get to like the weird time in like the late 80s, early 90s, and it was all like the weird leotards and
Right. Richard
like you get,
Simmons and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, you just
yeah.
get like these weird fads. And then like somebody again like decided, like now we've decided lifting heavy weights is good for you again, but like for a long time, like no, that's not good for you. And now kind of we've decided it's good for you. And the salt, that's kind of where I was going with this. Like,
Mm.
I remember as a kid, the grade school I went to had the four food groups thing on the wall of
Yep.
the cafeteria, right? Dairy, grains, meat, vegetables, and And I remember like I'm fortunate that I went to a private school and my parents could afford to buy me a hot lunch every day, but it was shit, right? It was a bunch of like GI like the canned peas and the big
Right,
gallon
right,
cans and all that shit. But like every day it was like a couple pints of milk and whatever the pizza burger or whatever stupid trash we were eating. And like we were eating all four food groups. And then we decided now we got this pyramid thing.
right.
Anyway, salt. I think my entire life, salt has been bad, right? We've been told that salt's bad. It's like something to flavor your food. But other than that, like moderation, moderation, moderation. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm 53. But it sounds like we're
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 just we're
somewhat
just a few years apart.
somewhat similar ages. And I remember doing Pop Warner youth football, and when we
Sure.
would go out of the high school locker room, we got to change in the high school locker room. There were these like inverted Pez dispenser things. They filled them from the top, and you pressed a button, and like a salt tablet would pop out the bottom. And our coach would tell us, grab one or two of those and pop them in your mouth and let them dissolve, and then sip on water. And nobody ever cramped, nobody ever had any issues, and that was like the late 70s heading into the early 80s. And then the food pyramid happened, and like all this stuff around uh, low sodium diets, low fat diets, all that type of stuff. And it's interesting because hypertension is a no joke problem. Like I think that we focus a lot of attention on cholesterol and lipoproteins, and those almost certainly have a big bearing on health and disease. But hypertension, high blood pressure is really gnarly because it affects the whole cardiovascular system, the kidneys, the heart, the vascular beds itself, your neurological state. So, like whether you do or don't develop different types of dementia, Parkinson's,
Mm-hmm.
Alzheimer's, kidney failure, cardiovascular disease overtly, like blood pressure is a big factor in that. And sodium plays a part in that. But what's been kind of lost in the shuffle is that when people become insulin resistant, when their response to carbohydrates specifically kind of get blunted and their body is producing more insulin than it needs, it can't really respond to the signaling around insulin properly. Insulin levels are kind of chronically high. And one of the side effects of this is that we retain sodium. And it doesn't matter where the sodium comes from. And this is where low sodium diets don't really address the cardiovascular risk factor of hypertension, because I could eat a zero sodium diet for a really, really long time, like years literally, and I will still have high blood sodium because we're just mining sodium out of my bones and out of my tissue,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Mm-hmm.
will hang on to every little scrap of it. Whereas if I eat a more, it doesn't have to be a low carb diet, but just a minimally processed carbohydrate diet, and I lower my insulin levels, then we tend to shed sodium. And this is one of the challenges of actually like legitimate ketogenic diets, is that there's this process called the natriuresis of fasting, where when our insulin levels are low, we just shed sodium like crazy. And so when people do fasting, intermittent fasting, or they just do like basic dietary cleanup, like they went from eating a garbage diet to eating kind of like a Mediterranean diet, they'll notice that they'll go from seated to standing, and they'll kind of get the room spins and get
Mm-hmm.
lightheaded. They'll get cramps and all that type of stuff. And it's because they're not hanging on to sodium the way that they used to. But also, interestingly, their blood pressure kind of normalizes. So I know I'm bouncing around all over the place there, but
No, it's good.
within the long arc of things, sodium was. So it's funny, like the term salary comes from salt. Like Roman soldiers used to be
I know
paid
this
in
story.
salt. Across time, it's one of the most important substances in history. Like there's all these wars have been fought over it and all this type of stuff. It's really kind of a fascinating historical item. It's a non-negotiable nutrient for the body. You'll die eventually if you don't get enough of it. It sounds really controversial, and like you'll oftentimes have doctors push back on this, but it's far more dangerous in the short term to have too little salt than, or specifically sodium, than too much. Like I can kill you pretty quickly by a different routes of diluting the sodium in your body. It's very, very difficult to kill you under time frame by overloading your body with sodium, but it really has gotten this kind of bad association over time. Maybe putting a bow on some of this. There's a really powerful association in the literature between sodium intake and hypertension, all these different cardiovascular negative endpoints. The reality, though, is that 85% of the sodium that Western societies consume is in the form of processed food. People aren't just like adding salt to their food via shaker or doing, traditional foods like kimchi and sauerkraut and olives and stuff and getting this level of sodium. It's from eating highly processed foods. And I would argue, and I think the literature supports this if you really, really dig into it and kind of suss things out, is that it's that highly processed, hyperpalatable food that's really easy to overeat, easy to gain weight, easy to become insulin resistant. And then you have a bunch of sodium along for the ride. That's not doing anybody any favors. But also, it's fairly clear in the literature, again, if you look at it with a fairly critical eye, that just low sodium diets don't really fix hypertension all that well. It'll bring blood pressure down a little bit, but it's not as profound as kind of global diet and lifestyle changes that improve insulin sensitivity and bring people back down to a solid baseline.
It's interesting. And you have to think, and I'm just surmising this, but if you're living with a diet that's consuming tons of shit food, what else are you doing? Uh, like, are you stressed out? Like you talked about
Right.
stress, like our adrenal glands and that whole system
Yep.
having this effect on blood sugar. You could have like a great diet, but if you're not sleeping and you're on a floor of a basement for 3 hours a night, shivering and eating shit all day, how's all of that? It's not just less salt on your eggs and bacon in the morning.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. It got it, like there's topics like the seed oil thing, and I don't know if you want to get into that.
Yeah, hit that a little bit. That
Yeah,
brings up a thought for me. It's like we're always looking for my friend
one thing.
Z. Yeah, we're looking for one thing. My friend Z, he's a fifth group SF guy, super stud, jiu-jitsu black belt, MMA fighter, very cerebral guy, Southern boy. So he talks like a South Carolina guy. He says we're always looking for the path of least resistance, and that's like, let me just find this thing. Let me eat this one vitamin. Let me read this one book, do this one thing. And it's, nothing works like that. Like, let me go to jujitsu and teach me the one move that I'll never lose. Like, yeah, it doesn't
Yeah,
work that
yeah,
way. Give me the
yeah.
one investment so I can make all the money.
Right. And so, I do think that there's arguments for carbohydrate restriction for a lot of people. Mainly because like all the foods that are easy to overeat, potato chips, pizza, ice cream, they tend to be fat carb combos. So when you look at vegan versions of this stuff, which tend to be all carbs, no fat, they suck. When you look at keto versions of this stuff, all fat, no carbs, they suck. And it's
Hmm.
the combo that's really the bugger. And if you look at kind of just natural foods, potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice, whatever. It takes a lot of work to stick those things together. And in traditional cooking, we just spent 2 weeks in Italy. You definitely have these great meals and you have pairings of stuff, but it's not the fat carb combo that we get out of like a Costco muffin or potato chips. It's just a very different type of experience. And something that has changed over the last 30 to 40 years, without a doubt, is particularly in the United States, because we grow all this corn and soy and whatnot, is this introduction of these seed oils. I've just like people have lost their minds over this stuff, and again they're like, if you just remove seed oils, everything will be right in the world. The rainbows will shine and the unicorns will come back and everything. And I'm
I
just
love
not
the
at
rainbows and unicorns.
I'm just not at all convinced that like if you take your Costco muffin and you swap out the soybean oil for lard or butter or what have you, that 1,400 calorie whack of hyperpalatable food is still not going to be a problem. I think if
Hmm.
you fry your Lay's potato chips in palm oil I don't know that it's going to be nominally better than some of these other oils. I do think that when we eat fried food and the fryer oil has been fried again and again and again, then there's all these oxidative
Yeah.
byproducts that are not good. There are problems in there. There are problems in that most of these seed oils have far too much omega-6 to omega-3. Um, but if you eat a little bit of fatty fish, you supplement a little bit of fish oil. It's not so much how much of the omega-3 or omega-6s that you get, it's kind of the ratio. I think that by and large, when we minimize seed oils, we're usually minimizing processed foods. But I think people have lost all context and reality around this stuff. Somebody will look at a salad dressing and it will have something like a great example is high oleic safflower oil. So it's very
Mm.
high in this monounsaturated 18 carbon fat called monooleic acid. It's Monoleic acid is rich in olive oils and some other, beneficial oils like macadamia nuts and whatnot. But what's interesting is that monooleic safflower oil, which people will lose their minds over, has between like 1% and 2% of these omega-6 short chain fats. Olive oil, which gets this health halo, excuse me, around it
Guzzle
just
it.
broadly, that at the low end has about 6% omega 6, and some varieties of olive oil have as much as 20%. And so I've been in these like online discussions with folks where they're up in arms over this salad dressing. Somebody will post a picture and of their meal, which is weird at this point anyway, but they've
It's
got this
very
particular.
fucking weird, man.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that seems like early 2000s thing. It's like, yeah, check. Okay, document your meals, but I think that's been done. But it's
Now,
interesting that.
just really quick, I
Oh
do
yeah,
post pictures of meals sometimes, but it's to tell people check out this restaurant my friend owns or I
that's a
visited. So,
different deal. That's an
yeah.
entirely different deal. Yeah, but it so I'll ask these folks, what's wrong with this monoleic it's safflower oil? Well, it's high in omega-6. Well, how high? I They don't know because people don't vet any of this shit out.
Hmm.
They just freak out. No, seed oils. Well, did you know that that tends to be 1% to 2% omega-6? What do you think about olive oil? Olive oil is great. Well, olive oil is between 6 and 20. So it's between 600 and like 2,000 times greater content of it. And so there's just a lot of like bullshittery, and I've been doing a lot of writing with Element lately, talking about this idea of the health advocate versus the health educator. The health educator,
Mm.
you come away from the experience and you feel empowered, like you have sovereignty. The world isn't just an A or B story. There's gray and there's nuance, but like you usually come away from the conversation with some tools. You can make some decisions and you can move forward. The health advocate, they have a topic that they for whatever reason, sometimes due to a health crisis that they've had or whatever, they're all fired up about. But when you come away from that experience, you're terrified. Seed
Mm.
oils are going to kill me. Girl Scout cookies have 42 parts per billion of lead, which kale and broccoli have like 3 times more than that. And you have to eat a
That's a good
kilogram
one.
of it
That's a
to get
fun
that.
one to
But
talk about.
and I would love to dig into that stuff because it makes me fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Because even some really smart, well-educated people out there, the way the algorithms are set up and the way that human psychology is set up, we respond to drama and we respond to danger in a much more vigorous way in anger. And if people check out the film The Social Dilemma, like you really get
Mm.
an insight into that. And part of what these online platforms learned about early on is outrage.
Plucking those cords.
Yeah, the outrage works way better for clicks than even like the cutest cat video type shit. Like those things work pretty good, but they're a couple of orders of magnitude less effective than getting people scared, getting people angry, and then creating this kind of mob deal. So there's this
Mm.
really perverse incentive currently in the health space, but it's all kinds of things, finance, jujitsu, all these different things where if you can get people scared or enraged, you get much greater engagement. And if you've got any type of monetization tied to, one's platform, then you learn really quickly. You become, there's this Pavlovian response. It's like, if I do a balanced, nuanced take on seed oils, I get a couple of likes and I get some of the lunatic fringe coming in to flame me and try to eat me alive online. But if I take this non-nuanced, fear-based approach and I'm a health advocate instead of a health educator, then I get all this feedback that's real positive. I get a lot of clicks, I get more engagement, I make more money, and it's a really fucked up non-virtuous cycle right now. And I'm not entirely sure how to unfuck that whole thing because it is an
Bread and
unqualified
circuses.
disaster. It is. It is the penultimate. And having just been to the Roman Colosseum and kind of watching, listening to our guide kind of, break down how and why they did that and how many resources were put into a daily show for people to stay distracted. It's kind of like, oh yeah, of course, during
It's
collapse, this is great.
I hate the trite comment of there's nothing new under the sun because there totally is. Airplanes are pretty awesome and they didn't exist at one point. But like in that sense, I mean that we're still humans. We're still motivated by these. Hey, you want to go watch some people get their heads cut off in the Coliseum? Yeah, let's fucking
Right.
go. Like that's still there. You're talking about Z a minute ago. I'm conversing with him the other day, and this is a conversation that we're having, and we're talking about. It annoys me because I can. If you ever look at my social media, like on Instagram, I share a lot of violent things, but the verbiage I attach to it is like how not to have these violent things happen and how to
Hmm.
possibly remove yourself from it. And people will look at it for the face value of the graphic and they don't read the paragraph or two, which 1% of people read it. And he and I were talking about this and he said, he catches himself. He said, I'm looking at some shit the other day, some like beautiful artistic expression somebody shared online. He didn't even remember what it was. Could have been visual, could have been a musical piece. And he says, and I just scrolled right by it and then caught himself like, you dumb asshole. Like, here's this beautiful thing that somebody created, shared with the world. And you could have at least taken 30 seconds to like read it or hear it, whatever it was.
Right.
But you just went to find some more tits and ass or whatever our brain is looking for, some more French fries or,
Right.
same kind of a thing. And then uh, CrossFit. I was with Brian McKenzie and Rob Wilson a couple years ago. And one of the guys at this event, I think you know Brian McKenzie.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. I I forgot who the guy was, but he was one of like the original CrossFit people. And we're having supper, and I'm like, "Hey, what's your Instagram account? I'll hit you up and share some pictures and blah blah blah." He goes, "I don't have one." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I said, "What's your gym's Instagram?" And he goes, "We don't have one." And I'm like, "Oh, wow." And it's I guess this huge Southern California gym. You probably know the guy I'm talking about, and I don't remember his name. And he
Was
told
it
me he's like,
CJ with
I
Invictus?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I'd
Okay.
have to look it up.
Yeah.
But he it was about 5 years ago. He said, I just hate the idea of how social media robs us of, life. And so I can't ask people to post pictures at gym and at the gym if I'm just like feeding this beast. So he's like, I just don't do it. And I'm like, we're in this like your brand is all over the internet and it without all that you'd be putting billboards up on the side of highways and in magazine ads in like Men's Health or whatever and that like it's so easy like
Yep.
pulling into McDonald's or whatever else and it's this like how do you juggle that?
One thing is we we recognize the benefit of social to some degree. It's also been, it's definitely a double-edged sword pretty early on, and maybe I'm giving away more of the secret sauce than what we should. But a couple of years ago, we capped what we spend on social platforms. So the amount that we spend on Instagram, Facebook, Google ads, that hasn't changed in like 3 years because we hate it. We hate all of it. But there's some amount of just like you gotta you know play play that game with the devil to make things work. What we did find is that finding really solid health partners like
Hmm.
Huberman and different people like that was probably a better allocation of resources. And ultimately, that all ends up being media too. But we were directly paying a person or a group versus just dumping it into Meta or Google or things like that. So I wouldn't. We have been thoughtful about it, and like we absolutely detest social media, but there's just a reality that man, you got to be running a pretty slick business, like cartel type cocaine, heroin,
Hmm.
something like that. And even then, if they could advertise it online, I sure shit think they would.
Yeah.
Um, but we have tried to be a little bit thoughtful about it, and we had at least a couple of years ago we made a decision for good or ill, like let's find other places that we can put some money into. And one of the things that we're doing currently, we haven't rolled this out yet, but we've been interviewing dozens of different researchers in the metabolic health space. And we want to fund just basic metabolic health research. So it's not research related to electrolytes. Like there will probably be nothing electrolyte related in the bulk of the research that we support. But like there's one outfit that is looking at pediatric mental health issues, including like bipolar disorder and some really gnarly stuff. Some stuff that these kids have horrible lifetime health outcomes because of these really intractable metabolic driven mental health issues, but we're looking at funding a ketogenic diet intervention for neurological health in children. And
Mm.
so the only place that anybody would see anything related to that is that Element funded some of this research. And well, where's the salt tie-in? Where's the element electrolyte? There's not really. Like we might do some electrolyte related research. I feel like most of the interesting questions around that have honestly been answered over the course of time. But one of the things that we feel pretty strongly about, our mission is health through hydration. So we've kind of got the hydration piece pretty locked up, but health is this super broad topic, and there's a ton of really interesting, important research initiatives that are really difficult to get funding. The NIH doesn't fund health related research, it funds disease related research. So a bunch of
Mm.
these things that are just trying to find health interventions to to benefit people, they, they're landlocked most of the time with regards to funding. So that's a place that instead of dumping more money into Meta or Google, we're going to put money into supporting basic metabolic health research. And I'm just
That's
hopeful that
awesome.
the goodwill and the benefit of that ends up benefiting the company long term. But
I
hope
like it.
even beyond that, it will absolutely benefit the world more because man, these kids that suffer some of these mental health issues related to metabolically driven brain issues. Like there's nothing for them. The pharmaceuticals are awful. The other interventions are awful. The suicide rates are sky high in these kids. And it's very anecdotal, but the anecdotal side of this is when these kids get on some sort of a ketogenic diet, their mental health improves dramatically, but we don't have
Hmm.
great, clinical randomized control trial type stuff on that, but that's what we're hoping to fund.
I've got a friend. I recently had him on the podcast. His name's Frank Amato. He's one of the guys behind the Brain Balance. Are you familiar with that
Okay. Yep.
organization?
Yep.
And it's not a medical treatment, right? So a lot of these children that come there, autism, ADHD, that kind of stuff. It's more taking a look at the kid, like what factors can we adjust? They're not trying to get kids off medicine or tell people what to do with medication, but like diet, and then of course there's a lot of exercises to stimulate the kid's brain to work in an optimal manner. I can't speak on it in a very articulate way because it's not what I do, but a ton of it, they start looking at these kids' diets and it's like, oh, you're
Hmm.
living off a pile of shit. And so um, that's pretty interesting. That's cool. I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear that you're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exciting. It's the company is doing well. So we, again, instead of just dumping more money back into the beasts, let's put some money into some areas that hopefully help some people. Yeah.
I like that. You've got a lot of strong opinions on all kinds of topics. And I like strong opinions. I've got a friend that owns a beef company, Jeff Smith. Him and his wife Cara own Colorado craft beef. Got a great story. I think she's four or five generations of ranchers,
Yeah, I know
and
those folks.
yeah,
Yeah,
great
yeah.
friends of mine. Uh, and like that kind of an industry, you hear some people, you can look at kind of like the seed oil. Beef is ruining the world. The emissions of their poop is destroying the planet. We're trapping and tracking down, huge swaths of prairie that they're just destroying. You've written a book, and I believe numerous articles that I've seen about the opposite of that. Talk about that a little bit.
Man, that's a spicy meatball to unpack. It's funny. I remember, God, it was 2002, I think. I was still in Seattle. I was getting ready to scoot, but I had a buddy of mine, also named Rob, and vegan guy. But this was at
Probably only had one B though.
probably he only had one beat. Yeah, because the other one was taken. So
Hoo-hoo.
this was at a time when people of very differing socio-political views actually still hung out, and like we would bust each other's balls. I've always been this kind of
Sitting smoking cigarettes in some
yeah,
fucking coffee shop somewhere, listening to
exactly.
poetry, arguing.
Yeah, yeah. And I've always been this kind of small L libertarian. I always saw myself as probably left of center because of some ideas around drug laws and different things like that. But we would get together and chat, and vegan guy, so he would bust my balls on the ethics and all this different stuff. But one day he was mentioning that we could feed all these additional people if we just took this inefficient process of feeding grains to cows in particular, and just fed folks all these grains. And there's so much shit to unpack with that, like nutrient density, like currently the world produces 50% more food than it eats. About 50% of the food produced globally gets landfilled. Now, there are people that suffer hunger. Most of that is a political issue, like people living in despotic regime territory, and there's just not markets and food distribution, or a host of
Just
things.
not a
But
way to get it there,
there's not a way to get it there. It's not for we
or
don't need more food.
or a cost-effective way.
Or-
If anybody's
Yeah,
ever visited the Central Valley of California, which I just spent a week driving around in, which I believe about half of our produce for America is grown in,
right.
and you can just, I mean, I just drove past 100 miles of almonds, which
Yeah,
have no business being there because it's a dry desert. And so we're pumping all this water down there. And it's like just to your point, I mean, it's several 100 miles of farmland where you could drive. It's wheat on one side of the road, then melons, then cherries, then almonds, then anything that you could put in the dirt that they can get the water to will grow there. And it does.
yeah, yeah. And so there's a bunch around the nutrition stuff, which I won't really get into too much here. We'll see if we can, but I remember I had a little bit of a buzz going, and I was talking to my buddy about this, and he felt like he had a real gotcha on this thing. It's like, you can't justify eating meat, because if we took the food that we feed to the cows and we fed to other things, then we could feed more people. And I'm like,
Hmm.
dude, cows eat grass, and it was, I was never a farmer, but I grew up around farming and ranching, and the people that I knew did that stuff. And so this was around 2002, and it really started getting me thinking about, and because I have a background in biochemistry, like I've done a decent amount of physics, and I think about things in terms of thermodynamics, like energy inputs versus outputs. Like early on, I forget when it was that they passed this bill mandating that some amount of corn need to be turned into ethanol to offset the gasoline. I'm like, this is complete bullshit, and it is. It costs more
It's total
energy to
bullshit.
make it than what you get out of it. If that was a net win, then the corn farmers who make that stuff would never buy gasoline. They would just run their shit on their corn, but it costs more than what you get out of it. It's a complete boondoggle. But it's a subsidy program, which is kind of the heart of where most of this is allowed to exist, is the fact that the government subsidizes a bunch of our food system, then we can do retarded shit with it, like processed food that then makes the population unhealthy, that then causes exponentially increasing healthcare costs and stuff like that, and subsidizing farmers to make a fuel that costs more energy than what you get out of it. It's
And
like
gums
if
your engine up.
and gums are in. It's got all these other knock-on effects, but at a really brass tacks level, it's like going to an investment banker and giving him $1 and you get 60 cents back. And you
Sounds
decide that
perfect.
you keep it. It sounds amazing. Like fucking sign me up.
So back up next week with your
Yeah.
paycheck. Yeah.
Yeah. So over time, I just researched more and more around this topic. And there's kind of a reality that of the earth that isn't ocean, uh, 60% of it is grasslands, 40 to 60% of it is grasslands. It's amenable for nothing other than being grasslands. We crop or have built on the vast majority. And the funny thing is, the areas that are best for crops are also tend to be best for building houses. So a ton of the places that we've built these, sprawling developments used to be like prime farmland, and so there's that. But there's all these areas that are like too rocky, too hilly, um, not really amenable for crops. But man, they grow grass and they support grazing animals wonderfully. And it has occurred that way for millions, if not hundreds of millions of years. Like you have analogs of bison and elk and cows within the dinosaur, kind of scene. And all the way down through history, there's been this interface between land plants in a prairie type format and the animals that eat that and the animals that eat them, and on and on, all the ecosystem diversity there, for a big swath of the time that complex life has existed on dry land. And shit, I know I'm bouncing around all over the place here, but it's so easy to make we get Diana Rogers, my co-author on the book Sacred Cow, and the film that we did, Sacred Cow. We call this carbon tunnel vision, where people, again, the one solution. If we just address this one thing, if we just address carbon, then all will be made right. But it's a really complex topic. The reality, and it's funny when you talk about this to kids, they get this immediately. When you talk to adults, particularly highly educated adults, it just takes forever to get people to this spot.
Brainwashed.
It's just funny. You go back to the carbon cycle. So there's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Plants, they operate via photosynthesis. They take energy from the sun during the day. At night, they pull carbon dioxide inside. They make carbohydrates, lipids, proteins out of that. Animals eat that. The plants, when the animals eat the plants, the carbon in the plants either become part of the animal or they poop it out. When they poop it out, that then becomes part of the soil development process. The Great Plains of the United States used to be 100 feet deep in topsoil, and it's because of generation after generation of grazing animals, grasses. When the grass roots, some of these plains grasses would grow 6 feet tall, which is kind of interesting because when you think about animals like bison and elk foraging during the winter, it used to not be 6 inches tall. It used to be 6 feet tall, almost like bamboo. And so this stuff would stick up above the snow, and they still had forage, and on and on and on. But these tall native grasses would have root beds that would go down 40, 50 feet.
Yeah.
And when they went deep into the soil, they were transporting minerals out, but they're also pumping carbon down into the soil to feed both bacteria and fungi that do the symbiotic process of mining minerals out of the earth. And as part of that, that carbon would end up getting sequestered below ground, and it would build topsoil, and on and on and on. And so we have these opportunities to really, oddly, to expand more grazing of animals on grassland, and in places like the Middle East. Even there's a movie more closer to home. It's crazy. There's a movie called The Sea of Grass, And it talks about how there used to be like a chest high grassland. Check this out, between Las Vegas and Salt Lake City. That
I think I've seen that movie. I've read quite a bit about this topic. Yeah.
Yeah, that all used to be grassland. But what happened is that a bunch of the settlers, the non-native people who moved to these areas, came from places like Scotland that were very, very wet. And their whole challenge was draining enough water to be able to grow food. They got
Hmm.
here, and we had beaver and all these
We
other things that
slaughtered the
made the area.
beavers.
They killed the beaver. The beaver used to, like, it used to be a much wetter environment, literally because of, I think, like 70 or 80 million beaver or something like that. Like Joel Salatin has the better numbers on this.
That is a fascinating study. I don't mean to cut you off, but
Yeah.
how this one rodent that we eradicate, Hudson Bay Company, making all these fancy hats and coats for Europeans, slaughters millions of these things, and they were so good at creating these ecosystems. And there's
Yeah.
been a few reintroductions of them in the 70s, 80s, and they've tracked with cameras mounted on telephone poles pretty much over a decade that a dry riverbed became a beautiful lake with elk and pronghorn and mule
Yeah.
deer and all kinds of creatures coming back.
Yeah, and it's tough because like we have beaver around the area that I live in, Montana, and it's kind of a shit show. Like a family
Mm.
of beaver will set up, and your creek that's flowing and your house that is otherwise not in a floodplain all of a sudden is getting inundated by this stuff. But I guess it's something for you. I would encourage people, if they're listening to this, be incredulous about this. Don't believe it at first pass, but also um, maybe do something crazy and do a little bit of follow-up research on it and kind of vet it out. But the West is a very dry place. Most of the North American West is just dry. It was artificially wet and ubiquitous with water, largely because of this beaver interaction and because of this predator-prey interaction of grass, herbivores, predators. When elk or deer or bison move across the land in a more natural way, they're really bunched up and they move towards fresh food. And they're bunched up because at the edges are predators, always. Like they just constant, it's a constant
Just
issue.
like what we see in the African plains.
Yes. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. And when you remove the predators, then these animals have a tendency to just kind of spread out. And the way that we do horses and cattle and whatnot, we'll put them out on pasture and we tend to not move them because it's easy. But these animals will then eat the prime stuff that they're exposed to and then move on. But then when that prime stuff, the prime grasses that they really prefer, when that starts growing back, they'll come back and they'll eat it again. And this is overgrazing. So areas can be overgrazed. They can also be undergrazed. Like if you don't allow animals into an area, and this is some of the like hippie, very vegan driven stuff. They don't want any animals to be allowed in certain areas to graze because like leasing of public land. So if you overgraze an area, it will fuck it up. If you undergraze an area, it will ruin it. There's this kind of middle ground, and that middle ground requires management. And the management either happens in a natural process because you've got a predator prey interaction that keeps the animals moving. They eat everything in an area, pee, poo, move on. And then it's weeks, months, or years before they come back to that area again, which allows the roots to grow, the plants to grow back, the biodiversity
Hmm.
to be in there and everything. But there are people like Joel Salatin, the folks at White Oak Pastures, Will Harris, that what they find is they get a much more productive footprint on any patch of dirt when they move these animals around. Now, it's kind of labor intensive. You have to use portable electric fencing and you have to put people out there moving these animals around and whatnot. But what we find is the packing density can be anywhere from like 2 to 5 times greater than what you would do just putting animals out to just roam at their leisure. So it takes a little bit more activity, a little more management, but like the studies that White Oak Pastures have been a part of, what we find is that that well-managed system ends up putting more carbon back in the soil than what it releases. And again,
That's cool.
circling back to this really cartoonish picture of this stuff, carbon carbon in the atmosphere, plants, animals eat it. They do their thing. They either live or die, do whatever they do. There is a carbon footprint to that. The animals exhale carbon dioxide, or they belch methane, or they die, and their body part, the protein, carbohydrates, fat break down into the base molecules, which ends up being water and carbon dioxide ultimately. That is exactly the same amount of total carbon as if you let grass grow, let it die, let it mulch. And when it mulches, it turns into methane or carbon dioxide. It's exact. And there was a study that was done a couple of years ago that,
Thermodynamics 101.
yes. And that's really the fucking thing. And this is where I feel like if you've got just
There,
a,
there, there is no perpetual motion machine here where we get something for nothing out of this.
yeah, and that's really it. And this is one of my I'll say it this way. I'll sound like a little bit of a dick. I'm not that smart. I'm not handsome. I'm not athletically talented, but I've had a lot of success in my life. And the success is driven because my operating system, the way I look at the world, the filter that I have is informed with some basic economics, an understanding of thermodynamics, and this basic evolutionary template. So like when all of these plant-based meat alternative companies were popping up and billions of dollars were getting dumped into them, I'm like, this is bullshit. There's no way
Mm.
they will ever be profitable. And I shorted those things and I made an absolute shitload of money off of them. And this is when people like Bill Gates and all these world famous people, billionaire people, are doubling down on it. And I'm like, how the fuck are you doing this? You're really smart. You've taken physics before, but they ignore it. Because an airplane can fly doesn't mean that gravity doesn't exist. It means that there's this thing called aerodynamics. And to your point about, thermodynamics 101, you're putting energy into that system to keep the plane aloft. It doesn't just
Right,
magically float. And this is
right.
true of all of the economy and ecosystems and our food systems and all this type of stuff. But fuck, man, I don't know how many people committed suicide listening to me talk about that. And I don't know how many people fell asleep thinking about it, but
It's no, it's very good stuff. We like to listen and talk about podcasts I've grown to despise. I've had this podcast for nearly a decade, and I don't really listen to them. I don't have the bandwidth to. If I'm listening to something, it's usually like an Audible book, or I'm working on my Espanol at the moment, which is not going that well. But anyway, it's so much just dribble, right? So much of this stuff is just like it could be any topic. It doesn't have to even be this space or the space that I'm in. It's just so much blah 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 blah, blah. And this idea, what we eat and how we interact with people through social media and the things that we're talking about, how to think. I was involved. I'm a fifth generation carpenter in the early 2000s when you
mm,
were doing all of this. I was kind of on the front edge of the green building movement. I've always been completely fascinated by high efficiency construction, and that's like taken this big turn. But in like the early 2000s, that term green, remember that popped off. And we were teaching people how to build highly efficient homes, which is not hard. And people have known how to do it for a long time. And there's a lot of really bad shit that happens from it, like plastics and foams and things that off
hmm
gas into the house and shitty materials that look like they're going to last forever. And now we're finding like real wood and dirt and shit like this is like really kind of a best way to build the house. But like during all of this, I'm going out and I'm talking to like school groups and building trade organizations and different organizations talking about like solar energy, wind energy, and I'm like, this stuff doesn't add up. Like if I help you get a grant for $100,000 to put a bunch of solar panels on the roof, and we did this stuff at your community pool to heat it with the sun, paid for by all the people of your state or country, that's great. But like the only way that we create efficiency really is either stop wasting the energy or use less of it. And like I'm in a room right now. There's a light, there's a light, there's a light, here's a computer, here's a thing, here's a thing. We just consume, 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 consume. And you just said we throw half of our food in the garbage. Like if we go through all this trouble to produce these delicious steaks or vegetables Like it was totally abnormal for a mom to take, nobody'd grow a garden, then go take half of it, walk the wheelbarrow to the compost bin and dump it out. You washed it, you canned it, and then you ate it all winter. Same with the meat. Like we canned the meat and salted the meat. And it's like we don't even appreciate that we're so flippant about what was life, be it a broccoli or a hoof on the hoof, that we just waste it. I'll buy more tomorrow. Fuck it. I'll buy more
Right.
tomorrow.
Well,
We
and there's an interesting angle on that. Like, so I think historically people have canned and saved as much as they possibly could. Refrigeration is clearly like this huge deal in limiting food waste, but all over the world, people use swine as like the final place that food refuse went. And instead of, so like chickens and pigs consume a shocking percentage of like our grain and soybean production and whatnot. Historically, those things, so like I think it was Calvin Coolidge, his thing was a chicken in every pot because
Oh
at
yeah,
one
yeah, yeah.
point chicken was like a really rare item that you had because they were a very background animal. The primary protein that people had was like beef or lamb because these are grazing animals and this is the thermodynamically efficient, protein source because you would grow it on grass. But chickens and pork have really supplanted grazing animals because of this kind of weird. If there was a place that like the vegans have something right about like, kind of a misallocation of food resources, it's chicken and pork because cows at least spend up to 70% of their life on grass and they get finished on grain. But even in their finishing process, we usually use crop residues. We put them on like a wheat harvest occurs, and then they put the cows out there and they eat all the crop residue and all this type of stuff.
Hmm.
And they do get finished with some grain that arguably could get allocated somewhere else. But chicken and pork are 100%, propped up by this stuff. Historically, it's been human food waste that went into pork production. And you look around a lot of areas of the world, that's what they still do. There's an outfit in New Mexico, and I forget the name of it, but these folks run it's regenerative, but basically what they've done is they've got the whole city involved in like the restaurants and even some of the homes. They have these special bins that they go around and pick up every couple of days, and they then autoclave, sterilize that food waste, and then feed it to the pigs, and then that food is then sold and fed back to the community. So there are a ton of these thermodynamic efficiencies, and honestly, just these like, to your point, I think what you were alluding to, the uh, respect for the life that's gone into this, whether it's a vegetable or an animal, it's like, well, let's keep this. Let's not just like landfill this stuff because
Hmm.
we're done with it. And the problem with that, like a ton of the issues that we face are kind of legal based, like homeowners associations and people don't want a pig farm nearby. And it's kind of
Hmm.
understandable, but if we want something that looks more akin to a sustainable process when in sustainable and regenerative, the way that I define them, sustainable is you could come back 1,000 years from now and it's roughly the same as what it is now, it's still functioning. Regenerative, you come back 1,000 years from now and it's better than what it is
Mm.
now. Like the soil's better, the environment's better, blah, blah, blah. We have the opportunity to have these more sustainable and regenerative food systems, but we've got to wrap our heads around there's going to be a little bit of not nice stuff that we're used to. Like you're liable to have a couple of pig farms on the outskirts of your town or whatever, and you might happen to live by that. It might not smell great sometimes, but
You get
um,
used to it.
you get you get used to it. That and it's that, or we keep doubling down on kind of the way that we're going. Like you just can't fucking have all of it all at once all the time. Like there have to be some compromises made. But again, just having come from Italy for a couple of weeks, like you see much more local decentralization of the food system. There's a
Mm.
lot more shit that's consumed at a local level. Now they also live in a Mediterranean climate. Like they can
Right.
grow for
Longer growing
most of the
season.
country, they can grow stuff almost all year round, at least to some degree. Not everywhere can do that. I live in Montana. Like 9 months of the year were frozen. So there's limitations to that, but even here there's more opportunity to eat more local stuff and do more things locally than really what we take advantage of. Not the least of which would be, instead of filling our landfill with uh, like restaurant food waste, that could be fed back into pork and poultry that are consumed locally.
Which from this circle of life standpoint, we've taken those nutrients out of the equation and now they're trapped in a big plastic lined pit for a million years, which might not seem like a big thing, but you take like there's a cool documentary I saw similar to this New Mexico thing you're talking about. A dude's got a pig farm outside Vegas and he's got a big freaking truck. And at night he runs through past all the hotels and they dump all that uh, those buffets of
Yep.
food, these trays. It's basically a semi dump truck, and he backs that sucker up, dumps it, and it's they don't think they do all this autoclaving because it's like this food from that day. They
Right.
dump it, a conveyor stretches it out through these freaking acres of pigs, and he's doing a service to the hotels that would have to pay to dispose of it, and he's making money off of it, converting it to pig flesh. But that shit just goes right in the landfill, and then it's taken. It's like your money being sequestered, and then you're never going to be able to do anything with it again.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Yeah.
interesting.
There's a lot of upside that we still haven't garnered out of the we've done a lot of interesting improvements, like more Burlog, the Green Revolution, all that type of stuff. There's a lot of pluses, some minuses to it. We haven't really put all that much effort comparatively into like this more sustainable, regenerative side. I think we're at the uh, absolute like first pages of a very long book on that. Like we're at the cover and title pages of it, and there's a lot to be written and a lot to be done. And so when people have anxieties around the future and food and the impact on the environment and the climate and all that type of stuff, I just think that there's a lot of positivity and upside awaiting there. But we need to be comfortable with the reality that there's going to be need to be some change, need to be some flexibility. I remember when we still lived in Reno, there was a lot of discussion because the Truckee River dumps into Pyramid Lake, which is an inland lake. And so there's no outlet to it. So whatever goes into the Truckee River goes there and it accumulates. So there was a lot of drama around like nitrates, nitrogen getting into the water and causing problems, and herbicides and pesticides. But I also remember I kind of let my lawn go a little bit wild. And so there was some dandelions and some clover. And my HOA gave me a nasty gram. They're like, hey, if you don't fix this, we'll start charging you $90 a day until you basically spray your lawn with herbicide to kill these flowers that are growing in it. I was like, I had to move, but I fired back to them. I'm like, hey, there's all these issues with the Truckee River, and my sprinkler goes into creates runoff, and then that goes into the sewer thing, and then that ends up in the river. So how are we as like an HOA addressing this? Like, well,
That ain't our
that's some
problem. I
other,
just
that's
want a
not our
nice
problem.
manicured
Yeah.
lawn.
Yeah, yeah, and I get it, but on the one hand, I get it, but it's like there's a cost associated with that, and people need to start. My father-in-law is an amazing guy, great at maintaining a lawn, like better homes and gardens, like backyard. Like he lays paver stones, landscaping, all this stuff. It's amazing, and I swear the guy like spritzes with Roundup. Like he just loved that shit. But it's been like a 15-year process where I'm like, Gary, man, we gotta do something else. We gotta get out there and like hand weed this shit. And even my
It's
wife has figured
poison.
out some. It is, and it doesn't really go away in a quick time frame. We're just now figuring out that it may have all these hormonal disruptor issues, mitochondrial disruptor issues, and just the knock-on effects within the ecosystem. So we might need to be comfortable with a lawn that gets some weeds and some dandelions, and that we might have to get out there and like hand maintain it. And if you don't want to do that, then do a xeriscape and get rid of your fucking lawn and minimize it and have some cactus growing in there or something like that. Like there's just some shit like that we need to wrap our heads around that uh, there's some process to all these things so that we can have some clean air and some clean water and good food and still have a great environment to be around.
Hmm.
But maybe every lawn doesn't look like a golf course, and maybe all the golf courses are kind of a pain in the ass too. But that's a whole
There's an
other thing.
interesting historical read on lawns, trying to keep the pests back from the
Mm-hmm.
house and all
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm with you. I grew up having to cut acres of grass every week and mow fence lines and stuff. It's it it's kind of like this use of food or electricity or and I'm not suggesting we should all downsize and live in a tent and not use deodorant, but at some point, like, when does a person say what's my part in all of this? And it's so easy to go, well, there's all these other billions of assholes, like, if they don't have to change, then I don't have to change. And you start to get to this introspective viewpoint on it all, like, what's my part in all of this, what can I control? And that's really, like, now you're starting to talk politics, and it's kind of nauseating in some way how so many people want to pound their chest about it, but then you see, like, whoever politician in their private jet pounding their drum about being eco-friendly and then burning 1,100 gallons an hour of jet fuel or whatever, flying to the golf course that's sprayed
Right.
with Roundup and all that shit. So we can get off it. I want to hear about the product. So, question: I asked you this once in person. Had a friend, Green Beret medic, that swore by another electrolyte product that may or may not have predated yours. His had sugar in it. And I said to him, hey, this other one I've seen has no sugar. And actually, yours, you guys say, doesn't have sugar. And he goes, well, it needs sugar because of this thing happening, cross gut uptake, blah,
Yep.
blah, blah, way beyond me. And how is yours better, different? Why does it not have sugar? Why does some other research chemists, doctors say you need sugar? Talk about the stuff that's in your package.
Yeah. So where that comes from is oral rehydration therapy for things like cholera. So like where people are dying from, I mean, like gallons of fluid exiting their southbound tract, and people will die from that
You're
stuff.
talking about
And
diarrhea.
yeah, yeah. And in a context like that, an oral rehydration therapy, you want a little bit of sugar in it. But the interesting thing is you only need about a gram of sugar per gram of sodium, and that's maximum. Like that's how much you need to be able to facilitate. There is a co-transporter in the gut that when you move one thing across one side of the gut, it moves something else across the opposite side of the gut, and sugar helps facilitate that process. So if you're dying, if one had cholera and they were dying, or if you're really, really just like, man, maximally in this really desperate situation of trying to optimize uptake, then you need sugar. But again, you only need a gram of sugar per gram of sodium. So like Element has a gram of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, 60 milligrams of magnesium. So you only need 1 gram of sugar in there. Most of these products have like 10, 12, 20 grams of sugar. Sometimes that's appropriate because people want a little bit of sugar as part of like a pre or post workout kind of carb deal or whatever. I've always been uncomfortable with kind of a one size fits all with that because it's like, do I have a 250-pound male, 115-pound female? So
Hmm.
we've always told people if you want some sugar in it, add your own. Like buy some
Just
dextrose and just do it the way that you want to do it. Because I hate these like one size fits all kind of approaches. And the
Rob,
reality is, oh yeah,
could you put like a squirt of honey in there or a squirt of agave or something?
yeah, any type of sugar will work with that. So like
Okay.
honey or agave or whatever. To me, just doing some granulated dextrose is going to be super cheap, and dextrose is kind of the optimum in this because it's the main sugar currency. It's what's in our glucose, dextrose. It's kind of the main sugar currency that our body
Where's a
uses.
guy buy dextrose? Where do you
Oh,
get
just
that?
just Amazon. Like you get some granulated. I think it's like $2 a pound or something like that. $2 a kilo.
Mm.
Like I think it's probably cheaper than buying
It'll last me
any of
like
that
a
other.
week.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. At least, yeah, yeah. So, and I forget the exact numbers on this, but I want to say it's like a 15% improvement in sodium uptake with the presence of of the sugar. And the interesting thing is, by and large, it's rare that people don't still have some food going through their digestive tract at some point. Like we tend to eat like 3 meals a day and all that type of stuff. So in general, when people are taking something like Element, which doesn't have carbohydrate in it, there's still active co-transporters that are occurring there. And there's co-transporters that occur with amino acids, with uh, glucose. So there's other things there. And then there's active transporters that cost a little bit of energy to move the sodium across. So just early on, because I think most people probably consume more sugar than what they need, we just said you don't need any sugar. And what's interesting, what's kind of funny about this is the companies that have said you absolutely must have sugar to make this shit work, they now have no sugar options too. So it's kind of a, we planted a flag and we've explained the science. We understand that there's situations within oral rehydration therapy where some glucose or carbs would be beneficial. We largely leave that up to the individual to manage instead of trying to like one size fits all that thing. But ironically, the folks who came out very steadfast saying that you must have sugar in the product to work now have no sugar products also, which I find ironic. So yeah.
I like that. Your product, do you guys use any kind of like, and this is not meant to be a sales pitch or anything. So if you guys listening, I'm not being paid to share this. I just want to know anything artificial in there, colors, flavors, anything like that.
So we have the raw unflavored, which has it's
So you're just
sodium,
basically
potassium,
eating minerals. I don't know.
yeah, and like if you put it in flat water, it tastes like a mineral water.
Okay.
It would be like a Perrier that went flat. It's got the mineral background to it. Anything that's got flavor in it will have some natural flavors, which people freak out about. They're like, "Oh my God, natural flavors!" And I really like RFK, but I think he's really out to lunch on some different things. I think both seed oils and natural flavors are two of the things that he's got wrong, and he's got a disproportionate focus on. The thing around natural flavors, always people will say, well, there can be other things in it. It's like, what other things? Show me some resources around what all these other negative things are. And it's again, I don't know if this is getting too far afield, but within the regenerative ag story, there's been this kind of doomsday thing out there that we only have 60 harvests left because we're losing topsoil. And this is true. We're losing topsoil. If you lose your topsoil, you're fucked. You're not growing any food anymore because you just can't do it. But when Diana Rogers and I were writing Sacred Cow, we were like, well, this is this very compelling reason to use regenerative ag because we need to regenerate the topsoil. But and this citation of like 60 harvests left made it into scientific papers and journals and media and all this stuff. And we dug and dug and dug, and it took us forever. There was no scientific reference to this. What we trace this back to is there was a World Economic Forum talk where they were discussing food security and whatnot. And a gal who's a researcher in this area was asked, how many harvests do you think we have left? And she said, I don't know, probably about 60. And this just took on a life of its own. And it took on a life of its own to the tune that it got referenced in scientific papers as like statement of fact.
And then once I read it in one scientific paper, now it's just
on and on. And so around this natural flavors story, there's this kind of mimetic thing that it's like there can be hidden things in there, and it's like, well, fuck, what? Like, it's like we'll run a GC mass spec, a gas chromatograph mass spec on this stuff, and it's like you can see D-limonene, you can see this, and if something says citrus flavored, it's a pretty good bet it came from citrus. It didn't come from like eucalyptus or something, even though there are these things like D-limonene, which is this small molecule that you find in citrus. It's also found in pine trees. It's also found in the roots of like ginger plants and stuff like that. So some of these molecules that have these characteristics, like vanilla, is in the vanilla bean, but there's also some pine barks have vanillin type compounds in them. So they can have some different sourcing. And what's ironic about that, you have like natural flavors, which are either directly extracted from a product. I mean, just think about making tea. Tea is a natural product extract. Coffee is a natural product extract. You've got a powdered substance. You run water through it, you extract some of the stuff out of it. So some of the stuff is made that way. Some of the stuff is made via different types of bacterial fermentation, where they feed products into bacteria, and the bacteria, through their metabolism, produce different products. And that's it. And then you have artificial flavors, which are 100% synthetically derived. People freak out about artificial flavors, artificial this, that, and the other. But from a chemical standpoint, they're identical and indistinguishable from the natural products, and oftentimes have a much better chain of custody profile. You know exactly where it came from, under what circumstances, and never had any other, stuff in it. Whereas natural products are by their definition kind of messy, because within like a tea plant, you've got hundreds of different compounds in it. Within a vanilla bean, you've got all these different things. And sometimes that's really good. That's kind of the difference between a natural vanilla extract, which will usually have 60 or 80 different compounds. So you have this really broad smell, flavor profile or whatnot. Whereas artificial vanillin is a synthetic molecule that is only one. If you were to think about like a bell curve, and there's lots of molecules that would hit your palate and your smell in different ways, vanillin is one slice. It is one bar out of maybe like 60 or 80. And that's why you're like, yeah, that's vanilla, but it's very hollow. It's very monochromatic. And that's kind of at Element, we have a really extensive blog article, What's the Deal with Natural Flavors? And it talks about all that stuff. And this is another one of these things where I'll see people freaking out about natural flavors, artificial flavors. And I'm like, are you lifting weights 2 days a week? Do you go for a walk? Do you do some jujitsu? Are you still smoking? Like, they so major in the minors. And even for somebody who has their diet really buttoned up, the natural flavors thing, I am just left scratching my head. I just don't, I don't, and I'm a pretty good chemist. I did a fair amount of environmental toxicology in the early part of my career, and I'll have these folks, and if people look at how I interact with folks online, I very rarely pull the credential card. I very rarely say, well, I'm a biochemist, you're not. I'm like, well, what are you saying here? Where's your reference? Like, sell me on where this is. But I have people with absolutely no background in chemistry or toxicology telling me that this thing's a problem. And I'm poking and prodding, trying to get them to develop the case for me why this is an issue. And I just don't get anything out of it. I think that this is another one of these scenarios in which, if you individually just don't want to do natural flavors, that's fine. But I would put it more in like a religious faith category than any type of like fact-based thing, because I just don't get it,
So how would somebody, so I very grateful. My parents had great diets for the most part. My mother, whatever we ate was kind of the way it came. I wrote a paper once in school, eat it when it was in the thought process was eat it the way God made it when it grows. And that was just kind of like the basic premise. And that's how I've eaten most of my life. I enjoy beer. Don't really, there's no candies I'd like. Maybe from time to time I did eat some like high quality potato chips from time to time. It's not like weekly or even monthly, but to me, it's not hard to do that. Give me like, I've been with you, we've eaten monster steaks or something like that. That to me is more enjoyable, or maybe like apple cobbler or something with oats and butter or some shit. None of that stuff for you though with your celiac. But I feel like I'm eating a pretty broad spectrum of food with minerals. Why would I need to open up a little packet and dump it in my water?
Mainly if for that sodium side is the main issue. This is a funny but true story. When we first thought about spinning this thing up as a product, I was like, all we need in here is sodium, but nobody would buy just sodium in a packet. And so we put the potassium and magnesium in there literally as like sterile fruit fly release. It's like nobody would ever buy a product there's only sodium. What's funny is there is a product that is only sodium, and it's flavored, and it was released from some NASA scientists who did all this research on what astronauts needed. And all that the astronauts needed for dehydration and sweating and mineral loss was sodium. And I mean, these guys really understood their shit. But literally the reason why, now there's maybe an argument for some potassium, there's maybe an argument for some magnesium. I'm being a little bit facetious there, but really the main thing that people need is the sodium. Like when we sweat, it's 98% sodium. You do have some potassium loss, you do have some magnesium loss. It's really inconsequential compared to the sodium piece. And the main area that folks end up deficient, if you're exercising, hot, humid environment, or if you are eating a pretty clean diet, people don't get generally enough sodium because even if you're eating a fair amount of carbohydrates, if it's minimally processed carbohydrates, your insulin levels will be fairly consistent. And so you don't retain sodium in the same way. And so you will find that you will have like the hypovolemic thing where you're going from seated to standing and get dizzy. You might have muscle cramps. You might have difficulty sleeping. This is where folks that track their heart rate variability, their HRV with like an Aura or Morpheus or something like that, what we find is that there are a lot of people that when they get their sodium more dialed in, it suppresses adrenal hormones, particularly at bedtime. And so it improves sleep, it improves recovery. But so the people who eat clean, ironically, probably don't get enough sodium because they just don't eat processed food. So unless they're doing something like a real judicious use of more traditional foods like olives or kimchi or sauerkraut, it's interesting, most traditional food, cuisines have these kind of side items that were really, really salty that people would just get little, samples of. And that would be a significant sodium source. So if you eat really clean, you probably need more sodium. If you exercise, you need more sodium. If you live in a hot, humid environment, elevation, all of those things tend to increase your sodium need. If you live at sea level, you don't exercise, you're a computer programmer, you never go outside, you eat a little bit of a junky diet, you probably don't need element. And it probably will taste like shit, even tasting it, because what we've noticed is when people are saturated on sodium, they don't like the flavor of element. It tastes very, very salty. But if you
Oh,
go
wow.
do a barn burner of a workout, you go to Henry's gig in Costa Rica, you drink element after element after element, and you never taste the salt because when you're sodium depleted, you only taste the sweet profile in that. You don't really get the sodium profile in it because your body still
I've
needs the
experienced
sodium.
that. Well,
Yeah.
I am a example of what you just said. I eat real clean. And just last week or 2 weeks ago, Henry was in town and we had like 4 or 5 days of training one after the other. And I was having foot and leg cramps, I was like, all right, I
Yeah.
better get some salt in me here. Like you start to feel my foot locking up or having some forearms locking up on me. Like, okay, I know what's happening here. But um, I wanted you to explain that because I think a lot of times people think, well, I eat enough, I put salt on my eggs or on my potatoes, so I'm good to go. But it's even in cold environments, right? You're not drinking as much. You're out skiing or camping or ice fishing or whatever. Talk about that a
Yeah,
little bit.
that's a whole interesting thing, and it shows how smart you are because not many people are aware of that. But and nobody fully understands the mechanism behind this. But when we were in cold environments, our urine output increases and our sense of thirst decreases. So it's
Hmm.
very easy, and like operators experience, like when we were really in Afghanistan and some of these high cold environments, like these guys really struggled with this because they just didn't want to drink water. Water alone isn't really addressing the issue. It can actually make it worse because you're further diluting your electrolytes. So you need something with electrolytes in it, but they had very little desire to drink stuff, and their urine output was increased because of the cold. And so this is, whether it's element or something else, something with a flavor to it, whether it's broth or something like just the chicken bouillon cubes or whatever, what you find is something that's got a flavor to it, whether it's salty, savory, or kind of salty, sweet, tends to encourage people to drink it more. And it's really important at altitude and particularly when it's cold. Like people
Hmm.
go skiing and it's cold and they're at altitude. and this is the thing, like you spend a bunch of money to travel to like Big Sky, Montana, and it's $400 for a chairlift ticket. And you want to get the most out of that day. You're not altitude acclimated. You're dehydrated because you don't want to drink enough, and your performance and your experience of the whole thing sucks. And so this is where I think folks spending a little bit of time figuring out their electrolyte needs really benefits them, because let's say an unconscious person arrives in the ER. The thing that the ER doctor looks at first is blood sugar, blood pH, blood electrolytes, because those things will kill you immediately if they're off. The only thing that's quicker is like oxygenation, but if your blood pH is off, that'll kill you.
Which also plays a role in blood pH.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, whether you're hyperventilating or hypoventilating ends up having a big deal in your acid-base balance. So it's funny that people, again, they will kind of poo-poo this stuff. And of course, like the dude selling salt, it's in my best interest to, promote this. But from day one, this is just kind of a sideline. But from day one, we've always released a how to make your own element homebrew. Like from the day that we launched, we've had this part of our website, make your own homebrew. And it's like, use this much sodium, this much magnesium, this much potassium, stick it in this much water, lemon juice, stevia, shake it up and go. And we've got probably 30 or 40 different recipes now to get different flavors and ratios of all that stuff. Yeah. So the main thing that we hang our hats on is our shit tastes pretty good and it's convenient. That's it. There's no other magic. Yeah.
I think it's kind of like, I own a coffee roasting business. We can all make coffee on the countertop, but most of us have stopped a million times and got a cup of coffee from somewhere. So it's, having it with you, having it available. I like that. I keep some I'm an EMT, so I keep it in med kits. I keep it in my backpack. I keep some in the glove box. Not even for like emergencies, but it's kind of like spread the shit out, like grandpa hiding cash. So I know I've got some in the drawer or wherever I'm at if I'm feeling ill or somebody is. It's crazy talking about like hyponatremia or the cold weather stuff. I had a gal at one of our recent events. She doesn't feeling well. It's a 5-day training. It's kind of cold, November in Nashville. And I sit her down and I said, like, well, what's going on? Like, and she's kind of dizzy. And I said, how much water have you drank? When's the last time you peed? I haven't peed today. It's 2:00 in the afternoon, maybe even 3:00 in the afternoon. How much have you drank? Well, I haven't drank anything since dinner. What? This is, last night. And we're running around all day. I'm like, why not? Well, yesterday I had to break to go to the bathroom, so I didn't want to miss anything. And like, you literally dehydrated yourself to the point that you're about to pass out. We had to have Dan's wife stick a IV in her and get fluids in her. And like just, you're willing to like risk even like passing out on concrete to not go pee. It's kind of a bizarre thing that will gamble with that.
Right. And you see it a lot. Yeah.
What did our ancestors do? They didn't have a little package that they tore open and poured in their cool Yeti.
That's a great point, particularly from like the dude that's always talking about ancestral health. Couple of things. And again, maybe it's self-serving, maybe it's actually an accurate depiction of the world. But when we process our meat, we bleed it. So a kilogram of standard meat has about 1 gram of sodium in it. But the bulk of the sodium that exists in a body of like a mammal is...
one more time, a kilo of meat, 1 gram of sodium?
No, it's about 2 grams sodium.
So I need to eat a whole kilo to get the sodium of 2 packs of your product?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And now there's no randomized controlled studies on this. This is some back of the envelope math, but the bulk of the sodium that exists in mammals is outside the cells. It's in the extracellular fluid. When we kill animals as part of the butchering process, we bleed them. And there's reasons for that. But what you end up doing is removing the sodium almost immediately, like the bulk of the sodium out of the animal. And it's interesting, under some more traditional cultures and certainly under just like field hunting an animal, it's not necessarily bled immediately. And what happens, part of the beginning of the breakdown that occurs after death of an animal is the sodium and potassium inside the cells equilibrate. The sodium goes into the cell, the potassium goes outside the cell. So just the kind of back of the envelope math that I've done is,
What was the
yep,
word you said?
they
Uh,
equilibrate.
equilibrate. Okay, so
Yeah. So they
equalize.
equalize across the cell membrane. So the back of the envelope math that I've done is that you might expect up to 3 to 4 grams of sodium per pound of meat in a more ancestral setting.
Okay.
I might be off a little bit on that. Like it's a guesstimate, but when you look at the way that I've backed into that is you look at the total sodium content of an animal, which is known. Like they'll take a whole cow and like bone, skin, collagen, blood, render it all down, and they know the total content. You know how much is in a kilogram of meat. You know how much is left over, and so one is I think that the way that people ate animals in the past, there was probably more sodium inherent in them. When you poke around some of the stuff like the Kung San by Richard Lee, he's a guy who lived among the San hunter gatherers. There's a book, Kung San: Men, Women, and Work in a Hunter Gatherer in a Foraging Society. These guys are renowned for like their persistence hunting and whatnot. Like they'll go out and run an animal down. But then what's well understood is those guys will take a week of recovery
Hmm.
afterwards. Like they're just kind of hanging out around the camp. They're not getting out, getting after it again. And when we look at like the fitness of hunter gatherers and even doing some historical reconstruction, when you look at how robust the bones are on these individuals, they're fit, healthy people. Like they're on par with like a good athlete in modern terms, but they're not like super athletes. They're not a power lifter. They're not a ultra endurance
Not
athlete or what have you.
specialized.
Not specialized. And also when they looked at there are folks. Oh, it's not Richard Wrangham. I forget the guy who did this work, but it ties into like the constrained energy hypothesis, where if humans put too much exercise, like at some point, exercise doesn't burn more calories because the body just ceases to put energy back into recovery. And this is where people like going through buds and stuff like that, their bodies start breaking down because at some point the body's just like, fuck it, like you're putting out all this energy output, and so we're just not even going to bother with recovery. But what's been found is that hunter gatherers are active, but they're not like mega active. It's not above and beyond. So I think that the electrolyte needs of our ancestors were probably less. Like arguably going to jujitsu 5 days a week, 3 days a week, wearing a pajamas, getting super sweaty, doing that, doing a sauna, and doing it again and again and again is probably above what ancestral demands generally were, even living in equatorial environments. And
So
so
the output and stress load was probably or is probably greater on modern man than it
I would think
was.
so. And you even think about like we've had really huge buy-in from what we call the industrial athlete, like roofers, HVAC people, and stuff like that. And I've talked to some of these HVAC folks that they'll get up in the attic of a house and it's 140 degrees in there.
Bro, I spent years doing that.
Yeah, and it's
Wrapped
and
in
they're
a
there for
Tyvek suit with a
yeah,
full face respirator on top of it.
yeah. That is a demand that like no ancestral there's no equivalent to that, and it's not, or if there was, it was a day, and then you didn't do that for a long time, and you have people that do it day after day after day, and so I think that this
Makes
is
sense.
where the ancestral model is really important to keep in mind, but it's we just have some situations where the demands like operators either in hot or cold environments carrying all the gear needing to move across a lot of terrain, cover a lot of ground, do huge physical expenditure, and really need to be on point, like be as optimized as possible. One of the first things that starts degrading with electrolyte disruption. It's funny. Electrolyte, pH, blood sugar is cognitive function
Hmm.
and like
Hmm.
fine motor skills, but the ability to make
That's
snap
a
decisions, fine motor skills.
that's a tell for me. Like if I'll do these 3, 4, 5 day teaching gigs, and if I start having a hard time, what word? Like not comparing it, but you're like, what was the guy's name? If I catch myself stumbling on material that I've spit out 1,000 times and I catch myself once or twice, it's like, all right, I'll take five and I'll dump some in me because I can feel like something's short circuiting a little
Yep.
bit.
Yep.
Shit's trying to jump across. What do you think about the stress load of modern man? Work, taxes, commutes, all the things that we have now. How does that play a role in all of this versus ancient man? Like, do we utilize these elements, these metals differently now with all of these modern stresses, with these high cortisol levels? Like, how does having jacked up cortisol and adrenaline all the time affect this stuff? Does it?
I, I, I'm not entirely sure. And I think there's a book, the stress paradox, and it was a real eye opener for me. I interviewed the guy years ago, and I really pushed back on a lot of the stuff because I was very in this like ancestral health model and thinking about the comparative stress of like a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, which wasn't without its risks, but you would argue there wasn't phone calls and emails and this constant hypervigilance and all that type of stuff. And this guy really impressed upon me that so much of that was the mental outlook that one took to the event. If you
Mm.
thought it was going to be stressful, it would be stressful. If you were like that, this is nothing sauce, and it was nothing sauce. And it's kind of interesting in that regard. Like a lot of the people who end up making it through like Bud's selection, they are different. There's some interesting differences there. Like they tend to have about 700 times the neurotransmitter peptide PYY in the brain. Nobody
Mm.
knows why. Nobody knows exactly why that is, but there's definitely the people who make it through that selection process tend to have higher levels of these stress peptides. They, in general, a lot of these people, clearly males and not just claiming to be males, but actually two testicles and a penis and all that type of stuff. These guys disproportionately, when placed under what most would call a stressful circumstance, some people would get a cortisol response. These guys up to a level actually get increased testosterone production. So they actually get enlivened by what we would consider a stressful environment. So I think a lot of what passes for stress is uh, the mental state that the person brings to the situation. Now, that said, if you're eating a diet that gives you blood sugar swings, that will fuck you up. Like it will crush your endocrine system. It'll release cortisol in a really negative way. If you want to grind someone down to an absolute nub, distort their sleep, like it's one of the only like enhanced interrogation techniques that's absolutely understood to work on everybody at some point. Like you keep somebody awake long enough and they will absolutely break. And the Guinness Book of World Records won't even entertain attempts at staying awake longer because the last 4 or 5 people that have stayed awake like 9 to 11 days, they go to bed and they never wake up. They just die and they do an
Holy
autopsy. They have no
shit.
idea why. Yeah. Yeah. So they'll let you juggle like flaming chainsaws, jump a rocket motorcycle over the Grand Canyon, but staying awake too long is understood to be so dangerous that the Guinness Book of World Records won't entertain it. So on the one hand, I would say that maybe the perception of like stressful modern life has been misperceived, but then there are these like really low hanging fruit things, poor diet, disordered sleep, those things will destroy you and that will absolutely break you off. I think that in those circumstances, maybe electrolytes are important, but what's interesting is one's cortisol tends to elevate it under those circumstances. So we tend to become insulin resistant. So we tend to retain sodium. So I don't know that, the person burning the candle at both ends, not sleeping well. I don't know that element is really something that they would, an electrolyte
We
supplement is really what they
we need to
want or
take a
need.
look back at the big picture at that
But
point.
you do, but if you do want to address what they have going on, we have some bigger fish to fry there. Yeah. Yeah.
I dig it. I've got a couple things I wanted to run by you. Do you drink alcohol?
Rarely, over time, I have drank less and less. When I was in Italy, I had a fair amount, like much, much more than I usually do. And the funny thing with that is it didn't seem to affect me the way that like some wine and stuff like that does here. And there's a bunch of theories and stuff behind it, but I've just found as I've gotten older, like I need to have my cocktail or two at like 3 p.m. for it not to disturb my sleep at
Ah,
9 p.m. Yeah. Yeah.
so that thought process of the Italian wines, I got a friend suffering from a horrible degenerative disease right now that they're blaming on his exposure to, he was a vineyard owner, to the
Mm.
pesticides,
Ah,
herbicides that he dumped all over uh, those crops. The Midwest, where I live, Northern California, Italy, and a couple other Mediterranean countries are hotbeds of the disease, Parkinson's being one of them. Like, do you try to shy away from foods that are commercially grown? Do you buy and eat organically grown products? Does that mean anything to you? I know a lot of it's. I was in Whole Foods the other day just to punctuate my point, and I read the labels. Mom taught me that when I was a kid, and stuff looks like this is amazing, all natural, blah, 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 and you roll it around and it's just trash. They're not lying to you. They just put a package on it that if you just read
right.
the book's cover, it looks like it's, Farmer John pulled it out of
Right.
the ground and put it in the box, but it's just an Oreo in a fancy package or whatever it is.
Right. You know, it's funny, historically, I haven't put a ton of focus on like organic versus conventional. Um, in the last couple of years, I had some really significant health issues, and unbeknownst to me, I had giardia, a
Mm.
roundworm, and candida overgrowth, and I was
What the?
dying.
Wait, this was just recently?
So we unwound this probably in the last 6 months,
You
and
out drinking river water or what? You up there?
so I went swimming in the Guadalupe in Texas, and I think that's where I got giardia. And what's interesting, I've had giardia twice from swimming in creeks and stuff. Usually it's obvious, like it just blows you out, super gnarly diarrhea and everything. I remember when I went swimming there, I had a little bit of problems, but it wasn't awful. But it was like I was sick a couple of days, and I don't know, like my digestive health is better than what it was when I had ulcerative colitis, but it's not perfect. This is why I still have to eat pretty tight. I have celiac. Every once in a while, I get a gluten exposure, so I've always got a little bit of weird, gut stuff going on. I'm pretty sure I got the Giardia from swimming in the Guadalupe like 5 or 6 years ago. I'm pretty sure, ironically, I got this roundworm that is usually only found in sheep and goats from a farm to table dinner that I went to because I went to this thing and then I was sick for a couple of days afterwards and I did some poking around on the internet and this particular type of roundworm and it tends to happen more in France than other places, but they're really good at harvesting all the sheep and goat poo and everything and using that as part of like regenerative fertilizer. But you need to be really fastidious about getting a compost pile that gets to 160 degrees, kills everything in it, and then it needs to be raked and dried. And if you bypass a step in that, then you can have these encysted particles that are the part of the life cycle of the organism. And then the produce needs to be washed well, or you need to cook it and all that stuff. And then I think I ended up with candida just because the giardia and the roundworm so
Wiped out your,
disordered.
yeah,
Yes. And I mean,
yeah,
I was
yeah.
fucked up. I thought I was dying. I was very, very sick. So, Gabrielle Lyon, Dr. Lyon, who's, just a great friend and a wonderful person. She's married to a retired SEAL who he's gone on to go to medical school and is now practicing. But she does a lot of work with operators. And what she was finding is as these guys would deploy, they come back. They were a total stud before deployment. They come back and they had all these gut and autoimmune issues and everything. And she suspected that they had parasites, but when you would run them through the normal ova and parasite testing within the states, she never found anything. And even an ova and parasite is looking at a stool sample and looking for literally ova, the eggs,
Like
and then
we
the
do with
actual
dogs.
parasites, like we do with dogs. And even in the FDA website information about ova and parasite testing, it has a 50% error rate.
Oh,
So it's like a
wow.
coin toss whether or not it finds it. What Dr. Lyon does is she sends this sample out. It goes to a university in Africa of all places, And it's really expensive because they need a live stool sample to make it from wherever you are to Africa in about 36 hours.
Oh
So
shit.
it was like $600 just to ship it there. But they found all the stuff that I had going on. I went through this extensive treatment. We treated the Giardia first, then the roundworm, and then
So
the
Rob, you did this. You
Candida.
sent your poop to
Yeah,
Africa,
yeah,
and that's how you found out about this.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, go
And
on.
so
So you,
then Dr. Lyon formulated this treatment protocol, went after the Giardia, then the tapeworm, then the Candida. It was awful. And the Candida treatment is probably the worst of all of them. They're just the antifungals, you feel awful on them. And this was like 5 months ago, 4 months ago, and I felt pretty good. And then I started feeling worse, and we retested, and the Candida was back. And so we went with a different antifungal, went through that again another 30 days. It was a completely different antifungal, and I felt great after that. Started feeling really better. And this we resolved all this stuff about 2 weeks before the trip to Italy. And I mean, I was like dying before this. I was really, really sick.
wow.
And then when I was in Italy, so it's hard to establish a baseline because I only had 2 weeks of being kind of like candida free by the end of all this stuff. But in Italy, I had much more latitude with my food. I ate more carbs, I ate more broadly, I had more wine and everything. And I felt great. I felt better than I generally do at home. And so when you look at the Italian food systems, and it's funny again, because I am kind of a small L libertarian, so I've been hesitant about interventions into different things like the food system because to your point, like when we grew up, we had the four food groups and then it became the food pyramid. Generally, when we've had US intervention into our food, it makes it worse and worse and worse. And so that's been some of my hesitation there. But for good or ill, you go to places like France, you go to places like Italy, they have so much pride in their traditional food processes that they won't fucking tolerate the stuff that we do. They just don't supersize stuff. They won't flex on flavors and ingredients and all that type of stuff. Like the kids were kind of tripping out because we've talked about it. You can see it online, but we got to actually experience it there. They got some Skittles that are made in the EU. And it's like beet juice and lemon rind and shit like that to color it. And they taste entirely different. And it was funny. Like
I'm
by and
sure.
large, the kids are like, these things generally taste better. And so I think that there is a food quality issue that's really important. And so since I've been home for the last, week, I actually committed to buying organic and kind of sticking in those lane lines. And oddly, I'm going to start sourcing a lot more stuff that we get from Italy and different European countries, or just really vetting the process. Historically, I've kind of poo-pooed that stuff and I haven't put as much weight in it. And again, I don't know how much of the issues that I faced previously were just because I was carrying three different gnarly parasites, but
Sure.
I felt so much better in Italy than I have historically at home, despite time zone changes and eating way more. I had gelato, I had sorbet, I had booze, I had way more carbs than I normally do, and I felt generally better than I do at home. But what it has caused me to do is to really reevaluate what I'm up to with all this stuff and make me want to focus on that food quality more than what I historically have done. Yeah.
Do you suppose possibly there could have been like a correlation versus causation thing? Maybe you just happen to be having a great fucking time with your family in this beautiful Mediterranean country and life is good and you and your wife are holding hands and the sun's setting on the and that just everything felt awesome. Maybe it had nothing to
It
do with anything other than that.
it could be, but I have a pretty easy life at home. Like I kind of I dictate my schedule. I live on a ranch in Montana. I do jujitsu when I want to do it. My wife is awesome and tolerates me, and like we have a great relationship. I mean, it's possible, but we were also traveling with 16 people. My wife and I were the only ones that spoke Italian, and so like we were. I, I was on the hook for a lot of shit. Like it's
Okay,
funny.
so
Like in some ways, it was actually more stressful than home, and yet I was probably more resilient than home.
I
So
didn't know
I
you
don't know,
speak
man. There's a
Italian.
lot, but the main thing that I think that your question raises is that this shit is so complex, and I don't know. And again, I'm only coming off of like by that point a month of having been downrange of clearly addressing like a horrific candida overgrowth. Like when we did the second testing, the gal that I was working with at that point, she's like, I've never seen somebody with candida this high that wasn't hospitalized. Like
Wow.
and I was sick. I mean, I was super sick. Like I had super fucked up guts, really bad diarrhea. It didn't matter what I ate. It was causing problems.
That's
And
horrible.
so just simply clearing the candida was probably a major deal. So I do think that I forgot about this. Everybody else in the group who isn't fucked up like I am, who have healthier guts, they were commenting that they felt better and they were having more booze, they were
All
having
right.
more
So there,
desserts, and everybody else was like, dude, I feel fine. Like I feel better than I do at home. And when we would have one of those really big classic Italian meals where you would have the antipasto and then you would have your primi and your secondi and your dolce and, run through the whole thing. And it was way more food than I would ever eat in a sitting. And I would be kind of uncomfortable from it, but it wasn't like at home where if I had gone to
but
like Olive Garden and done that, like
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
literally would
yeah.
want to kill myself. Yeah.
I dig
Yeah.
it. Okay, that's cool. How about coffee? Are you a coffee drinker? It's funny,
I
like, go ahead.
No, no, I do, but it's funny. For years, I hit this point where when summer hits, I don't like coffee and I switch to black tea. And then at some point, as the winter sets on, the black tea just doesn't seem to have quite the punch and the nads that you want, and I switch back to coffee. So like during the summer, I'm a tea drinker, and during the winter, I'm a bit more of a coffee drinker. Although
I like
over
that.
over time, I've liked black tea more and more relative to coffee. Yeah.
One of those topics that I've heard different. I'll call you a food influencer kind of a guy because you do write and talk a lot about that. But I've heard some people like now coffee's horrible, it's poison, and you're an addict if you've got to drink it. And then other people, fuck you, it makes me feel lovely and I love it. Shut up. So it's kind of and of course, some people also talk about all the health benefits of it, and other people are like, there are no health benefits.
It's a tough one. It's not super robust quality, but it's a very consistent signals. There seems to be a dose response curve of like coffee and tea intake and improved all cause mortality. Like that seems pretty straightforward. But then this is something that I point out, and I point this out with regards to nutrition generally. So there's a half-life for caffeine within the human body, and a half-life is, would say you consume 100 milligrams, which is kind of a standard cup of coffee. How long does it take for there to be 50 milligrams and then 25 milligrams and on and on? The average across the human population is 8 hours. It takes 8 hours on average for the bell curve. But there are people that will clear it in as little as 4 hours. And we call these people fast metabolizers. And then there are people that it takes up to 36 hours to
Oh, wow.
clear, for the half life of caffeine. So there are people who say, if I have coffee this morning, I won't sleep until tomorrow. The next day very well. It'll disrupt my sleep and everything. People will say, bullshit, I can drink it and go like right to sleep. And all of that is true. And this boils down to this really profound individual difference story, which is, I think, where trying to take too much from an aggregate medical recommendation, it is really misguided because there's so much individual variation in the way that people respond to things. There was a study out of the Weizmann Institute in Israel where they fed people different carbs, and depending on who you were and what your gut microbiome makeup was and your genetics, one person would eat a banana and have like a completely flatline blood glucose response. Like they had a great blood glucose response. Another person ate a banana and the blood glucose response went to the mood. Other people would eat a cookie, no blood glucose response, and then the cookie would send them to the moon. And sometimes the person who had great blood glucose response with the cookie had a horrible blood glucose response with a banana or like
Mm,
strawberries or something like that.
sure.
So this is where like some of I hate the term biohacking, but just paying attention to blood glucose levels, like the way you feel after meals, or even getting in and doing like a continuous blood glucose monitor. Sometimes it's worthwhile to do some under the hood fiddling like that, and I think just respect that people can have shockingly different responses to things. When I wrote my second book, Wired to Eat, I talked a lot about that Weizmann Institute study And as part of kind of research and kind of promotion for that, Nikki and I would both eat the same amount of carbs, like 50 grams of carbs from rice, which is a scoop, or like 3 corn tortillas or whatever. Nikki's Italian. She's way more metabolically healthy than I am. She's 30 pounds lighter than I am. But her blood glucose, like if we had a cup of rice, her blood glucose would go to like 110, 115, and then it would really gentle climb, really, gentle return. Mine would go to like 190 or 200 and then fall off a cliff, and I would feel
Hmm.
awful from that. And anecdotally, I've just known this. This is why I've eaten a pretty low carb diet over the course of time.
Makes you
Like
feel
I
better.
just, I feel way better, and I know that I just feel awful when I eat these higher carbohydrate levels. And then circling it back around to that coffee question, there's antioxidants, there's all this stuff in there, there's a social component. I think that there's all these benefits, but I think that again, there's just this huge individual piece to it. And so if you've got some baseline stuff that you're tracking, and again, tracking like a heart rate variability. I really like the Morpheus platform. There's things like Whoop and Aura and all this shit. But if you have something that's kind of objective, and HRV looks at your total allostatic load, your total stress load, and it gives you a really good insight into how things are going. And if you change something, this is really the thing to figure out, and it circles back around to like element and electrolytes and all this stuff. If you do something and your HRV improves and your recovery improves, it's a good thing. Like it's unequivocally a good thing. And if you're doing something like you're having a glass of wine a couple of days a week, and you notice that the days after you have the glass of wine, HRV is poor. Maybe you have less wine. Maybe you do it earlier. Maybe you don't. Maybe you have hard alcohol instead of wine. Maybe it was probably, but it starts giving you some tools to be able to tinker with things so that this objective measure of recovery and resilience, if you can use that as a basis, pin that as your North Star, then it gives you a great way to orient. Do you need more carbs, less carbs? Do you need more cardio or less cardio? And you can orient things around that. And also things like caffeine.
I dig it. How about
Yeah.
all these collagen supplements I keep seeing pop up? I've heard some doctor, dietitian type people say your body doesn't even absorb it. You're just eating ground up bones and it's doing nothing. You're just pissing it right out. Like, what are your thoughts on that stuff? I see this fad of scoop of collagen in the coffee right now people are
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah. So there's a guy, Chris Masterjohn, who's about 10 times smarter than I am on this stuff. Like
Well,
he's
what the
he's
hell's his number?
get him on here. He's great. He's a big fan of doing more collagen and things like that because there are two key amino acids, one being cysteine that you get more out of collagen, one being methionine that you get more out of like muscle meat. And this cysteine to methionine ratio is important, and the overabundance of methionine tends to be potentially pro-inflammatory because it leads
Hmm.
into homocysteine, which is an inflammatory blood marker. It seems to be potentially damaging to the vascular endothelium, and so getting a balance on that is good. And you look at traditional diets that usually included bone broth, or when people made soups, like they boiled the bones down, and you just they did more organ meats and stuff like that that are
Hmm.
richer in the cysteine. So I think historically people just had a more balanced ratio of that stuff. So there's an argument on that front that there would be some health benefits from it. And then there was a STEM Talk episode where the folks talked about this and doing collagen. I forget, it's like 15, 20 grams, 10 grams, something like that. 100 milligrams of vitamin C before a strength training session. And in particular, say like you have elbow tendonitis and you go do a mobility session after that, that it enhances collagen production something like 600%. And there's
Oh,
some
wow.
legitimate clinical endpoints that suggest that that process was really beneficial from the perspective of improving like joint, tendon, ligament integrity. That if you have something like tendonitis or like a strained ligament or something, and you did the prehab work after taking that 10 or 20 grams of collagen, 100 milligrams of vitamin C, and then you did that work afterwards, that it dramatically enhanced the recovery on that. So I think there are some legitimate applications for it. It's also sold as like Chuck Norris tears, and it'll make your penis larger. Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's great. And it's got this window of application, but then it also takes on this whole other life unto itself that
Kind of
is
like
kind of
the
bullshit.
thing we talked about early on, like the stop
Yes.
shop.
Yeah.
Cacao,
Yeah.
that's another one I'm seeing a lot of people talking about now. It's like it seemed like 10, 15 years ago, people started talking about like red wine or
Yep.
chocolate, and then it was like an excuse for gals to like guzzle a bottle of Pinot at night and eat a chocolate bar. And um, now I'm seeing some studies coming out that is pointing towards some of the flavanols and things like that
Yep.
in the chocolate, but there's like no hard data on like the best way to get it into you. And like, I just saw some lady that works for Mars, some smart PhD talking about, uh, she found uh, no correlation between like the percentage, like in the dark chocolate, and the substances that we find are good. Like, you know anything about any of that shit?
Yeah, yeah. So these polyphenolics, they're somewhat similar to what you find in green tea, and they're just a lot of these, whether it's red wine, green tea, teas in general, coffee, chocolate. There are these compounds that seem to maybe have these health promoting benefits, and initially they were touted as antioxidants, which can be true. But what we're finding more, so oxidative stress is absolutely a problem for aging and for different disease processes. But then some studies were done where they would just dose animals with antioxidants, and these animals actually got sicker and worse. Like,
Hmm.
well, what the fuck's going on here? What we find is that we need the right amount of oxidative stress, and what these compounds function as potential pro or antioxidants. And what a lot of what seems to be the benefit, if there is benefit, like the carnivore people would say, there's no benefit to vegetables. Never touch them; they'll kill you, and all this stuff. And I think for some people with a particular type of gut issues, that may be true. Like Jordan and Michaela Peterson, like they've definitely noticed that the removal of plant material has dramatically benefited them. And Michaela had like juvenile rheumatoid arthritis that ended up leading to her having 3 different joints replaced before she was 17. Like people
Dang.
dismiss her a lot, but like she's very high functioning now and no disease process after she removed these plant products. But what appears to be part of the process with the benefits of these plants is actually the oxidative stress. These plants actually cause a low grade inflammatory response in the body that then ramps up the body's response to produce more glutathione, more endogenous antioxidants.
Ah,
It's virtually identical to exercise or getting a tan and all these other things where a little bit of a stress today makes you better adapted to a larger stress tomorrow. And that living things need some degree of stress, some sort of disruption. There have been studies, mainly in plants, but they'll create a completely perfect environment where there's no stress on the plants and they end up dying. There needs to be some. It's basically a signaling process. There needs to be some sort of stress signaling to actually make things turn over and do the things that they're supposed to do. And so I think that this is where a lot of these things, coffee, tea, ironically, even nicotine, like nicotine mints and gum, like tobacco is not really a win, but there's some very interesting shit in the literature on that, where smokers have like a 40 to 60% decreased rate of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, seem to be protective despite all of the oxidative stress, despite all the things that we know that are negative about smoking. The nicotine molecule appears to be highly neuroprotective for a ton of folks. So
that's interesting.
yeah, yeah,
Let's
yeah.
all have our cigarettes.
Well, I'll stick with my mints and
I'm
and
just
uh,
kidding.
call
I was
call it
just
good with
kidding.
that.
I
Yeah.
know I know a few medical doctors, in particular in the anesthesiology field, and they pop that gum or mints like in
Yep.
between surgeries and stuff, keep their brains spooled up, and they swear by it. But um, I think those guys often are experimenting with all kinds of stuff. The anesthesiologists that I know,
Right. Right.
yeah, they're kind of like you, where you know too much, so you can start to like pull levers on things and play with things.
Well, and when you have access to stuff like that, you're like, huh, wonder what some propanol feels like. So,
I'm not suggesting these guys are doing any of that. Dude, I really appreciate you. It's been years I've tried to do this with you, and life has gotten in the way. It means a lot that you take the time. How do people find your product?
Element, just drinkelement.com. And, I guess at this point, just about any podcast they listen to, we're probably pimping our shit on there, but drinkelement.com is kind of where we're at. As of probably close to the release of this episode, we have a brand new lemonade flavor that is out. And, I mean,
Delicious.
again, self-promotionally, like it's fucking amazing. Like it really is amazing. And part of what we're doing with that is we're giving away thousands of lemonade stands for kind of like a junior entrepreneur program. So people
Oh,
have been
wow.
nominating kids to get these lemonade stands. And dude, they're super legit. Like the box that it is shipped in is like 55 pounds because we had this flat pack thing where you open it up and you put together legit lemonade stand with like a roof on it and everything. And then we give these kids free product. And part of our ask is that they do like a profit and loss deal and report that back to us. But it's this junior entrepreneur initiative that we launched around the lemonade, kind of release.
Teach a man to fish. I dig it.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
like it. I appreciate you taking the time. You guys that have watched this, if you've got questions, you got comments, you can find Rob in a million places online. Throw some comments up here and let us know what you thought. If anything didn't make sense, that's your fault, not ours.
Well,
Be
if
well.
anything made sense, it's shocking.
No, man, that was a good conversation. We covered a lot of ground. I learned a lot. I appreciate you taking the time. Hope to see you again.
Take care.
Congratulations on that black belt, too, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's badass. How many years did you train to get your black belt in jiu-jitsu?
That's a long. One story is the first jujitsu I ever did was in 1993, and I did about a week of it, and then I didn't do any again until 2004, and did about a week. But really, like, it was 2012, a week after the birth of my first daughter. My wife was basically like, "You've wanted to do jujitsu. You're now 40, whatever. You got to go do it." And so I was consistent from 2012 till now. I had two kind of 1 year breaks in there because of moving and whatnot, but pretty, 2, 3 days a week, just grinding away, doing a lot of seminars with people like Henry, like John Frankel. I think was a ridiculous, disproportionate advantage because I wasn't in the gym 5 days a week, but I went and did training with people who are amazing. And I will pat myself on the back that like the bulk of the training that I do, like live rolling and stuff like that, is more positional drilling, like the areas that I'm deficient in,
Hmm.
really focus on that, do more positional drilling than live rounds. And I got pretty good. It was good enough for SBG to give me a black belt and not be completely embarrassed and horrified by the whole thing. So it was cool.
No way. That's cool. You put the work in. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Parting words for people listening, viewing. If they never meet Rob Wolf or see you again, what would you leave them with?
Oh man, hey, you catching me by surprise with that one. Damn, that's a great question. I don't know, man. That's a good one.
What's in your heart, Rob? What would you say?
Trying to think of some learnings that I've had of late. I guess it is maybe trite, but I would circle back around that. I do think that a basic understanding, economics, thermodynamics, which is just energy inputs and outputs, and then evolution, gives one an absolutely disproportionate understanding of the world. And there are great courses, like if you're not into math, you can get some just conceptual understandings of these things, cartoonish kind of understandings. But in my opinion, if folks don't have a basic understanding in that stuff, the world is basically magic. You really don't understand at all the way the world functions. And we're in this situation where we make big decisions like Do we put up windmills? Do we put up solar grids? Do we kill off all of the cattle and make Soylent Green and stuff like that? And I think that without a decent steeping in these things, it's really difficult to make an informed decision around that. So if I were, and again, I would say that I've had disproportionate success in the world because I've had these insights and I've been able to use that to look at the world and make informed decisions around that.
I like it. Education matters. Be well. Don't be dickheads. Tell somebody you love them. And Soylent Green is people. Some of you youngsters have no fucking idea what that means. Go Google it. Soylent Green is people.
So good.
Thank you, sir.
Bye, man.
Visit our website, CarryTrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., CarryTrainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@CarryTrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@CarryTrainer.com or CarryTrainer.com.